The largest spy agency on Earth isn't American, it's Chinese. And it's not a theory, it's fact. According to a bombshell report by CBS's 60 Minutes, China's Ministry of State Security, MSS, is waging a silent war across the globe. This isn't just spying. The MSS is embedded in universities, companies, even city governments. Their goal? Control narratives, steal technology, and silence critics. Even here in the US, they've opened covert police stations, recruited on LinkedIn, and threatened Chinese dissidents on American soil. From Germany to the Philippines to Taiwan, China's network stretches everywhere. And the CIA? They're fighting back, recruiting Chinese officials online in Mandarin, launching a counter-espionage campaign in plain sight. This is the new battlefield. Not bombs, but influence. Not soldiers, but spies. In our latest episode, we pull back the curtain on the world's most aggressive surveillance empire.
To the shadows today. We're doing a deep dive into a really crucial, often unseen part of global affairs intelligence, espionage. Specifically, China's Ministry of State Security, the MSS.
Yeah, the MSS. We've gathered quite a bit for this dive, drawing from things like a recent 60 Minutes piece, various intel assessments, reports detailing their activities all over the globe.
And our mission really is to give you a shortcut, a way to understand this powerhouse agency. We want to pull out the key stuff, the scale, the methods, the surprisingly wide focus, and really unpack why it matters for international relations, national security, maybe even for you personally.
Exactly. For you, especially if you're trying to make sense of current events or maybe studying geopolitics, perhaps even, for exams where knowing about major state actors is vital, this gives you that critical context on a really influential player.
Right. We'll try to extract those core insights, build that solid foundation for you.
And hey, if you find this useful, please do hit like and subscribe, and definitely leave a comment, questions, thoughts. It's the best way we can keep exploring these big topics together.
Okay, let's get into it. The main player, China's Ministry of State Security, MSS. Founded back in 1983.
And the picture that emerges from the sources is, well, it's pretty different from Western agencies. It's often described as potentially the largest, most active spy agency anywhere. There's one estimate from Jim Lewis, former U.S. diplomat, putting the workforce possibly as high as 600,000 people.
Wow, 600,000, that number. It's kind of staggering, isn't it? And their job description is huge counterintelligence, political security inside China, domestic surveillance, plus aggressive foreign intel gathering, both humans, spies, and a lot of cyber stuff.
And what really stands out, especially compared to, say, the CIA or MI6, is how deeply tied the MSS is to the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Its core mission seems inseparable from internal control, keeping the party in power. Jim Lewis put it sort of like the equivalent of the CIA, but with much greater powers, pointing to that internal political side.
That political link feels absolutely central.
Yeah.
Historically, they were super secretive, right? Deep shadows. But the sources suggest a change, especially under Xi Jinping, and maybe even more since Chen Yixin took over in 2022. They seem bolder, more visible, putting out propaganda videos, running digital campaigns.
Which is interesting, that visibility. It leads to a really key question. Who is this massive, increasingly public agency really targeting? You'd think foreign governments, maybe the U.S.?
And the U.S. is definitely high on the list, yeah. Jim Lewis suggests it's a close second target. But the sources point to something pretty surprising as their number one priority.
It's not another country. It's China's own people, specifically Chinese nationals living outside China.
Wait, their own citizens living abroad. That seems counterintuitive for a spy agency we think of as focused outwards. Why? Why would they be the top target?
Well, the rationale offered by Lewis is that the CCP sees Chinese nationals overseas as a fundamental risk that must be managed. Because, they could potentially plot against the government or maybe get recruited by foreign powers, and this seems crucial. They might uncover or share truths the regime wants hidden, things they don't want getting out globally or even back home.
So it loops right back to that CCP focus on control. suppressing dissent wherever it might pop up. The reports we looked at, like the CBS ones, connect this to a huge effort to monitor, influence, watch, and even intimidate Chinese dissidents living elsewhere.
Exactly. So the MSS's role goes way beyond just traditional spying between states.
Yeah.
It's about projecting the party's control internationally, shaping narratives, making sure people stay loyal, squashing dissent within those diaspora communities, even when they're on U.S. or European soil.
Okay, so huge agency tied to the party, focused heavily on controlling its own people worldwide. How do they actually do it? The methods sound incredibly broad. You said it feels like they're everywhere.
They definitely seem to want people to feel that. Remember that propaganda video mentioned in the sources? The one claiming the MSS senses things before they happen and fights against evil?
Yeah, sounds pretty dramatic, like a movie trailer.
Jim Lewis had an interesting take on that. He saw it as doing two jobs at once. Partly a recruitment pitch, sure, but also a pretty blunt warning, basically. Cross us and we will find you. It's psychological messaging as much as anything.
And the real-world impact of that, in places like the U.S., seems serious. The sources mention over 140 people indicted by the U.S. Justice Department just in the past 5 years for crimes linked to Chinese spying, cyber stuff, harassment, intimidating those diaspora groups.
Yeah, 140 indictments. And they even seem to target specific groups sometimes. The sources mentioned a focus on recently laid off U.S. federal employees, particularly after workforce cuts at key contractors and tech firms. It suggests they're opportunistic, looking for vulnerable points.
And this is where it gets really interesting, maybe a bit unsettling for many people listening, because it involves platforms we all use. Professional networking sites like LinkedIn. Huge channel for MSS activity, apparently.
Well, absolutely. Western intelligence agencies have been warning about this for years. MI5 in the UK reported the MSS approached over 20,000 people there, mostly via LinkedIn.
20,000. In the UK alone. That's casting an incredibly wide net.
And it's not just the UK. France reported something similar back in 2018, around 4,000 individuals targeted. Germany, over 10,000 citizens approached. The tactic seems to be blanket these professional networks, start up seemingly harmless chats, and then slowly steer the conversation towards gathering intelligence or trying to recruit people. That connection request might not be so innocent.
And it's not just digital. They also run physical operations, sometimes surprisingly out in the open, sometimes very covert. That FBI discovery in Manhattan's Chinatown in 2022 is a wild example.
Right, the secret police station. It was disguised as some kind of community help center for Chinese nationals, but U.S. prosecutors say its real job was monitoring, threatening, harassing dissidents right there in New York.
Jim Lewis called that a blatant signal disrespect of the sovereignty of that nation.
Yeah.
And 2 Chinese-American men ended up being charged over it.
And Lewis pointed out this wasn't necessarily a one-off. Similar kinds of operations, or at least attempts, have been spotted in places like the Netherlands and Canada, too. Seems like part of a global playbook.
That global reach really is something. It goes way beyond just North America and Europe.
Definitely. Look at the Indo-Pacific. In the Philippines, just recently, April 2025, a Chinese national got arrested near their election commission, allegedly doing surveillance. This person reportedly had an MSI catcher, one of those devices that mimics a cell tower to grab phone data, and had also visited other sensitive places like the Supreme Court, the U.S. Embassy. Beijing denied it, of course, but it points to ongoing intel gathering.
In South Korea, too. Since mid-2024, their intelligence service has reported at least 11 incidents. Chinese nationals caught photographing military bases, ports, airports. They might claim to be tourists, but Seoul sees it as low-intensity intelligence activity, like baseline mapping.
Then back in Europe, things are definitely active. The sources detail this big case in Germany involving someone called Jian Ji. He used to be an aide to a far-right politician, Maximilian Krah. Jian Ji was charged with spying for Beijing going way back to 2002.
And the accusations are serious, right? Passing hundreds of sensitive EU Parliament documents, surveilling dissidents.
Yeah. And what's really telling about MSS methods here is his alleged cover story. He apparently pretended online to be a critic of the CCP, use that persona to get inside anti-CCP circles, build trust, all while secretly feeding info back to Beijing. That's a long game, deep deception.
And maybe the place facing the most intense, constant pressure from Chinese espionage is Taiwan.
Yeah.
The scale there is daunting. Liu Liang, a former head of Taiwan's Military Intelligence Bureau, estimated there could be over 5,000 Chinese operatives working across different sectors in Taiwan.
5,000. And actually prosecuting them, it's incredibly tough. Takes years, maybe 2 or 3, just to build a solid case against these deep cover agents. So they get to operate for a long time.
So faced with all this huge, widespread, multi-pronged MSS activity, what's a counter-strategy for somewhere like the U.S.?
Well, one interesting move is that the U.S. is trying to fight back on a similar battleground. The public digital space. The CIA launched this very public digital recruitment drive aimed squarely at Chinese nationals and officials.
That does sound pretty unusual for the CIA, doesn't it? They usually prefer the shadows.
It is unusual. It signals how significant they see this challenge. They're putting out these polished videos in Mandarin, building on a campaign they started in late 2023, basically saying, hey, if you have information, here's how to contact us safely.
Trying to tap into any dissatisfaction within China's system, obviously. Turn that into intelligence.
But the risks for anyone who responds are immense. Jim Lewis really hammered this point. Many Chinese people, even living abroad, are terrified. They worry that if they cooperate, the MSS will retaliate against their families back in China.
It really highlights that this isn't just spies versus spies in the old-fashioned sense. The source called it a public, digital, and psychological contest.
Yeah, and if you zoom out from the specific tactics and incidents, this whole deep dive points to some really big implications. This isn't just about stealing secrets anymore.
It feels more like a challenge to the basic rules of how countries interact, a challenge to democratic sovereignty itself.
I think so. Jim Lewis had that really stark warning in the sources. Countries that don't respect their own citizens don't respect their neighbors. He basically argues that fundamental rights are the bedrock of international security. When a country mistreats its own people, he says, you're next.
That's a powerful connection he's drawing. That internal repression and external aggression are linked. So the MSS's actions aren't just spying, they're about projecting authoritarianism globally, trying to weaken open societies from within and without.
And the U.S. intelligence community seems to agree. Their big threat assessment from March said Beijing will keep expanding these coercive and subversive malign influence activities. The stated goal, to weaken the U.S., both at home and around the world.
And didn't that report also flag the role of AI, saying it's going to make China even better at spying and running influence ops, possibly harder to catch?
Exactly. It's not static. It's evolving with technology. And the things that suffer in this silent war, as the sources called it, are pretty fundamental. Free speech, privacy, national sovereignty.
So, for you listening, whether you're tracking global security, studying politics, or just trying to understand the major forces at play, maybe especially if you need this for something like the UPSC exams, this isn't just abstract intrigue. It connects directly to core ideas about how states behave, about human rights, about sovereignty. Really crucial stuff for understanding the world today.
So just to quickly recap, we've looked at China's MSS, its sheer size, its surprising main target, its own diaspora, its global reach, using all sorts of methods, digital and physical, and what all this means for international norms and democratic values.
It's definitely complex, and as you said, constantly changing, especially with technology like AI getting mixed in.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. As AI gets more deeply integrated into intelligence work by the MSS and others, how does that fundamentally change the game? How does it alter influence, surveillance, control on a global level? And what does that mean long-term for personal freedom and national borders in our super-connected digital world?
That's a big question, definitely one to keep thinking about. What part of this deep dive stood out most to you?
We really hope this breakdown has given you some valuable context on a really significant and growing global issue.
And again, if you found this deep dive useful, please give us a like, subscribe to the deep dive, and drop your comments below, questions, other insights you have. We genuinely appreciate your input and enjoy continuing the discussion with you.